Okay, so for Unit 4, Royal Power and Conflict, we are going to cover royal power and absolutism. All right, so first thing we need to discuss, the royal power and conflict, the time period is the 1500s through 1750. So this is going to take us actually all the way prior to the United States separating from Great Britain. Okay, so this is actually going to cover the colony phase. This is going to cover a lot of different things. So this covers creation of powerful kingdoms in which all loyalty is to the crown. When we say kingdoms, in the last section under exploration, we talked about how many of these different countries were starting to colonize different areas across the world, many in South America, North America. They tried to colonize areas in India. They wanted to look for different trade routes. So what you're going to see is these European countries will now become kingdoms because they have taken over or colonized more than just their specific original territory. This also meant that the ruler of this kingdom was the monarch. In a monarchy, the power is unlimited and it's only held by the monarch. Okay, so according to this idea of a monarchy, they believe in what is known as the divine right to rule. When someone is a king or queen, people look at them as if God placed them as the king or queen. Therefore, you cannot challenge their authority. They have the divine right. God put them there. They are now all powerful as far as the ruler. Now, this is going to be different because when we discuss the United States separation from England, they create a republic, which means that power is not held in just one hand of the monarch. The power is not under one specific ruler, it's now up to representatives. So this is going to challenge everything. But let's get to monarchs first. So this is where we come first. What you need to know is you have the leading families in these major countries. So again, when we talk about this, if you remember in class, I talked about how these monarchs, they only wanted to marry rich people. I'm sorry, not rich people. They only wanted to marry other royals. So what we'll see a little bit later is that there's going to be some incest in there. But at this point, the country of Spain, is ruled by the Habsburgs. Okay, in England, which is Great Britain here, they are ruled by the Tudors, which is going to be known as the Tudor dynasty. In France, you have the Bourbons and the German states, which are going to be around in here. Okay, they are ruled by, again, the Habsburgs. So monarchs, the way that they gained power within their country, they could decrease the power of the church. For example, if you remember in England, you had Henry VIII, who actually split from the church and created his own church, which now put him at the head of the power. Okay, they could also decrease the power of the nobles, who were other wealthy elites within that system, or they could increase the economy, such as gaining colonies, which means they send their people through exploration to other countries to gain resources, land, gold. Remember the 3 Gs: gold, God, glory. And that is how kings and queens gained power. The two positive outcomes of centralized rule, according to monarchs of Europe, were they served as a unifying force. They also wanted to bring about greater efficiency and control. Okay, so this is why when we say centralized rule, it means that power is just in one hand, okay, or they're one hands, and it was central in their one country. Okay, so it was unifying, and they brought about greater efficiency and control. Now, Spain. Spain, remember we said, was under the rule of the Habsburgs, and this is along with the Netherlands, southern Italy, and Central Europe. It was a very wealthy, very powerful family. Okay. Now, first we'll discuss Philip II, 1556 through 1598. He is the Catholic son of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and Isabella of Portugal. If you remember, we talked about Charles V as the leader of the Holy Roman Empire in our unit under the Reformation. Philip II made Madrid the capital, which was the center of Castile. Madrid was seen as a threat to the culture of other areas, such as the provinces in Aragon, and he caused several revolts. Philip II was the enemy of all Protestants because he saw himself as the leading defender of Catholicism and worked to eradicate or get rid of Protestantism. So you remember when we talked about the Reformation, I said that what you'll see next, when the Holy Roman Empire, kind of like the Catholic Church, starts to break apart, what you will see is there will now be holy wars. So these wars are going to become, central to countries' entire agendas because they're now fighting based on their religious beliefs. Some of these people were so, felt so strongly for Catholicism that they wanted to get rid of anybody who was a Protestant. Okay, and what you'll also see is when they start to colonize different parts of the Americas, you will see that they will. Okay, sorry, I don't know why that stopped. All right, here we go. Anyway, when they start to colonize parts of the Americas, you'll see that certain colonies are actually founded on different religious groups' beliefs. Okay? All right, we're still going. Good. All right, the 4 difficulties that Philip II faced in ruling Spain and his empire. The first thing that he faced, uneven laws. There was not a uniform system of government. It had not been established yet. Okay? So again, when we talk about a monarchy, remember we said that the power was centralized within that one person. So in this empire here, there wasn't really a system of laws that had been created yet. So each different area that Philip II ruled over did not have a uniform law system. That means that certain things might be legal in one area and they might be illegal in the other area. Okay. The next thing that he faced is that the revolt of Aragon in the 1590s sparked resentment of Castilian dominance, okay? And this is Castile, okay, which will eventually be Spain. Again, this is Aragon. So these 2 different areas are, this Aragon led a revolt, and Spain, it created resentment there. There was also religious differences and a growing challenge of Protestant England. So England, remember that King Henry VIII splits and creates the Anglican Church, or the Church of England, which is Protestant, and now this is challenging the Catholic Church. And we said that Philip II is the son of Henry V, which is the leader of the Holy Roman Empire. Okay? I'm sorry, not Henry. Wow, Charles. There's so many. Okay? So let me repeat. Okay? So, Philip II, son of Charles V, leader of the Holy Roman Empire. Now Philip is going to try to rule his empire, and he has to face challenges from the Protestant England, which is of a different religious group. All right. So what Philip does is he decides to invade England because he disagrees with their religion, okay? Now, Henry VIII is no longer king. He actually passes, but the person who is in rule of England now is Queen Elizabeth I. So he wants to rid himself of Queen Elizabeth, who supports Protestant rebellions in the Netherlands, okay? Before this, he supported her against the Pope's wishes. But they, of course, now start to disagree because of her well, basically her faith and also her support of the Protestant religion. He also wants to invade England because he wants to stop the Dutch rebellion. Now, I know these are very complicated. There's a lot of different pieces that are moving here. So one thing that you need to know about these two major countries, okay? So the English Navy is actually known worldwide. It's always been very well known because of how well functioning it is, the fleet that they have, the ships that they have. Okay, so during this point in history, England had a very prominent navy. Now, so did Spain. Spain had what was known as the Spanish Armada. Okay, so they sail for England on May 30th, 1588. Just picture in your head, these are like, these ships that you've kind of seen in Pirates of the Caribbean, if you've ever seen that. These are major ships, okay? Just imagine in your head 130 of those ships sailing for one country. Each of those ships totaling 30,000 men. Now, how did England win this battle? They won by separating Spanish ships. Then they forced them to retreat to the stormy North Sea. So England actually used the weather to their advantage because it's actually very rough water, very windy. They have a lot of sharp currents in that area. So England, of course, knows this and they use it to their advantage. And that is how they ultimately beat the Spanish Armada. There are 4 factors that contribute to Spain's decline in power after the defeat of the Spanish Armada. Because keep in mind, once that ships have been defeated, that kind of like takes out their entire fleet. So they contribute to Spain's decline in power because what happens is the costly wars will drain the treasury. You can't just keep fighting wars if you have no money. Wars are very expensive. So after that, the government is then forced to borrow money from foreign bankers. That means that these governments now have to now also pay back interest to these other countries. Okay. As a result, the Spanish economy, they suffer inflation, which means that the value of the dollar gets all kind of messed up. Well, they don't have a dollar. I forgot the actual name of their currency at that point. It gets kind of messed up to where it's not actually worth what it's supposed to be worth, if that makes sense. I'm trying to do it in a very simple way. And as a result, you're not getting as much for your money, and it causes a rift in the economy. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. This also results in sharp price rises. The prices will rise. And a lot of people have trouble affording certain things, so their economy kind of tanks. Now, Charles II, he is going to be the last of the Spanish Habsburgs. He is actually Philip IV's son. He died without an heir, and then the European monarchs plotted to control the succession of the Spanish throne. So this is what I'm talking about. Whenever there is not an heir to the throne, now you've got other families across Europe, like rich families or just royal families who are now vying to try to take that seat and take over the country. England. This is where we get into the Tudor dynasty. So this dynasty ruled England from 1485 to 1603. They brought unity to England after a long period of social, political, and economic turmoil. Not as absolute in power, some of their power was shared with Parliament. Now, when I say absolute means that all power is held by that one person. Think of a dictator, okay? Hitler, for example. Hitler had all power. He could make whatever law he wanted. He could send the military wherever he wanted. He could put people in concentration camps, which is what he did. That is absolute power. Now, in England, they did not have absolute power because most of it or some of it was shared with Parliament, which is kind of where we get this idea of it's a parliamentary style government because power is really central to that one branch. Okay, this is what they kind of have now. We have Henry VII. He was the first Tudor monarch. He helped to rebuild England's economy by encouraging the expansion of foreign trade. He also improves the collection of taxes. So that means he comes up with a better system for them to tax their citizens. He also is very, involved in regulating government spending. So he starts to pull back on certain things that they spend their money on. He says, whoa, whoa, we got to work our budget out. And then he avoids war through diplomacy and marriage. When we say marriage, that means that literally he was trying to avoid war by maybe arranging certain marriages with the different heads of these other countries. So he could have maybe, I don't know if he actually did that with his daughter, or maybe it was his wife, I think. Okay, so Henry VIII. Remember, we talked about him. He was the most powerful of all the Tudor monarchs. Okay, he fought wars in Europe and started to build England's navy. Remember, I told you that they were very powerful later on. Remember, he went through the many divorces. He beheaded many of his wives. Some of them died. He divorced some. He had many wives. Okay, so many wives. Catherine of Aragon, that marriage was annulled. Anne Boleyn, remember, he had her beheaded. Elizabeth, okay, so Jane Seymour died giving birth to Edward VI. Anne of Cleves, that marriage was annulled. Catherine Howard, beheaded. And then Catherine Parr was the last wife that Henry had, and she outlived Henry because Henry died. Now we get to the next one, Edward VI. Notice how young he is there. That should be the other way around. I apologize. It's supposed to be 1533 to 1547. That is backwards. I'm sorry. All right, now we get into Mary, Bloody Mary. She was Catholic. She marries Philip II of Spain and wages war with France. Mary dies, and the throne goes to her half-sister Elizabeth, who is a 25-year-old Protestant. Okay? Elizabeth I, this is where we get Elizabeth, okay? She is known as the People's Queen or the Virgin Queen, and she ruled from 1558 to 1603. She never married because she didn't want to endanger her throne. She was shrewd, highly educated, and forceful. So she was actually very smart. She challenged this concept of women being quiet, women being the household, to maintain the household. Okay, so she challenged that. She was very, she tried to dominate. Okay. Culture flourished in England as well as the theater under playwrights such as Shakespeare. Remember, we said that she was actually a supporter of Shakespeare's theater. She went to some of his shows. She wanted to keep balance of power, so from 1558 to 1603, Parliament did not have the power to initiate legislation, but it could influence and withhold approval for specific laws. She also helped to create this very strong navy. It says that the sea powers were demonstrated when she defeated the Spanish Armada. So remember, her dad was the one, I'm sorry, Henry VIII was her dad, but her dad was the one who tried to create this strong navy, and then she obviously carries it through. We get into the Netherlands. They wanted independence from Spain, which was a Catholic nation, remember? Elizabeth supported Protestant rebellions. So Philip II of Spain invaded England. I know we just kind of flip-flopped here. We've actually gone back to what we discussed at the beginning. Okay, so Philip II, remember, he was the son of Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire. Philip II invades England because, remember, he was Catholic and Elizabeth was Protestant. So she was the last of the Tudors. There was controversy there, though, of who would actually take the throne after Elizabeth would die. She had no children, so her cousin James becomes king. He is King James VI of Scotland, also known as James I. I will get us like a nice little tree here at some point. That way you can see exactly who comes in what order. I'm going to have you write this down. France, now we get into what is known as the Bourbon dynasty. All right, so we have Henry IV, or Henry of Navarre, in 1589. He is a converted Huguenot. In 1598, the Edict of Nantes grants the Huguenots, or the Protestants, worship in areas where Protestants were a majority, but they forbade Protestants from worshiping in Catholic strongholds such as Paris. Now we get into Cardinal Richelieu. Y'all forgive me on butchering the names. He ruled for Louis XIII due to age. He wanted to build an absolute monarchy by reducing the power of the nobles and the Huguenots. Now, keep in mind, a cardinal is part of the Catholic Church. So now you're seeing how the monarch and the Catholic Church are starting to intertwine in some of these other countries. Wow. All right, so sorry, had a call. Okay, so Louis XIV, he is known as the Sun King because it was believed that everything revolved around him. Just like we know that the earth revolves around the sun, Louis, known as the Sun King, believes that everything revolves around him. He reigned for 72 years. Okay, so regents for first 18 years of his rule. He built the Palace of Versailles outside of Paris. He also made nobles live there to control them. The Palace of Versailles is huge. Okay, I'll have to show you kind of what this thing looks like on the inside. Because this palace is built, it costs a massive amount of money, which means they drain money from the citizens because you have to use taxes to pay for these things, okay? Now, keep in mind, when we say taxes, it's not the same amount of taxes that we pay in the U.S. today. This is through a monarchy. It is a different system of government than we have in the United States, okay? Louis XIV was harsh towards the Huguenots. He repealed the Edict of Nantes, and many of these Protestants emigrated to the Netherlands, England, or England's American colonies. Now, the Huguenots were kind of like this rich group, kind of like merchants in a way. So when they left, they weakened the French economy because that means they took their money with them. Louis XIV also taxed the poor for benefit of the rich. He spent money on the lavish lifestyle and wars. You have the War of the Spanish Succession and the 7 Years' War. So what this does, it starts to set the stage for the French Revolution, which will then overthrow this French monarch, or the monarchy, okay? So, yeah. All right, so the War of Spanish Succession, France was brought into it when Charles II died in 1700, and Philip of Anjou or Anjou became King of Spain. Now, the three negative effects the war had on France: it drained the treasury. Okay, keep in mind they have spent all of this money. These monarchs have spent all this money on these lifestyles. They've built this Palace of Versailles. Now they've been on these wars. They didn't win the war. So after this, it drains the treasury because remember I said wars are expensive. It also brings about increased poverty to its country and its citizens. Then it created opposition to Louis XIV's rule. So now we get to German states. There's the Holy Roman Empire. There were many wars between them. So this is kind of in the middle. We have France here, we have Spain here, England. So all of these were known as the German states. And we have Italy down here. All right. This also becomes part of Italy later. All right. So the German states, they have what is known as the 30 Years' War. It's a war between the Protestants and the Catholics that turns political. There are three causes of the war. First, conflicts between Catholics and Protestants. The second cause is the spread of Calvinism. And the third cause is resistance of the Protestant princes of Germany to the rule of the Catholic Habsburg monarchs. Some of this we're not really going to get too far into because, you know, honestly, some of this is not exactly my favorite thing to teach, but here we are. There are 5 countries involved in this war: Germany, Sweden, Spain, France, and Denmark. All right, so if you look here, I don't know what this map language is, but okay. All right. Ooh, I went way too far. Wow. Did I go too far? Yes, I did. Okay. All right. So we have the Peace of Westphalia. Westphalia. It ends the war, which results in adding Calvinism to the list of recognized religions. It also causes divisions of Central Europe into Roman Catholic and Protestant territories. The Holy Roman Empire remains divided into more than 300 separate states. By the way, when something is divided like that, it's not very strong, so it cannot maintain its power. Also, the Habsburgs could no longer establish an absolute monarchy all over Germany. So that means, again, that there was disunity. So these different countries were kind of acting on their own and not unified. We get into Austria. So Maria Theresa took over the Austrian throne. This pragmatic sanction allowed her to take over after her father died. It was controversial because she was a woman. Mostly it was men. You'd have a king, but now she is a queen and she's in charge. She overcame male bias. She was very able to be an administrator. Okay, so that means that she was very accomplished. She knew what she was doing. She was not just some random female that was chosen. She actually fit the role and ruled well. The four major accomplishments of Maria Theresa is that she strengthened the Austrian central government. She furthered the building of roads, and you might think, well, what is that? Roads are very important when it comes to trade. It's also very important to unify your country because you want to make sure that the people can get where they're going easily, okay? If parts of your country are not connected, then you have now left out different groups of people. It's just a mess. That's why infrastructure or roads, highways, those are very important to the success of a country. She also ended trade barriers between Austria and Bohemia, and she used government funds to encourage producers of textiles or fabrics and glass. We get into Prussia. This is the, Hohenzollern family. I'm bad at this, I'm sorry. And the enemy of Austria. Hohenzollern. Okay. So you have what is known as the Great Elector. This is Frederick William. He increased strength of Brandenburg, Prussia by working out a deal to tax the people, which gave him money to create a professional army. So we have Frederick William I. He rules from 1713 to 1740. He is actually a royal drill sergeant. He develops a great fighting force known as the Regiment of Giants. That would be a pretty good band name. His great accomplishments, first, again, he creates a very strong centralized government. He also supports production and trade. He brings more money into the government treasury, which is always nice. And he makes his army the most efficient fighting force in Europe. So they're very well known for their fighting, their military. We get to Frederick II, who is the son of Frederick William I. So Frederick II is known as Frederick II the Great. He looks kind of, it's an interesting picture there. So we have what is known as the War of Austrian Succession in 1741. Spain and France, they back Prussia, and Great Britain and the Netherlands back Austria. So it's kind of like a world war in a way, because you have different countries backing others. Peace was established in 1748 with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, which recognizes Prussia as an important power. It also allowed Frederick William II to keep Silesia, and it allowed Maria Theresa to keep the rest of her domain. The 7 Years' War. It was not 7 years. It was fought over power in Europe, India, and North America. Okay, so in North America, the fighting was between Great Britain and France versus Great Britain versus France and the Indians. The results: France lost much territory, and Great Britain became the strongest political power. In Europe, Austria and Prussia continued to fight. The end of the war, Great Britain now becomes the empirical leader of the world. So they are the most powerful country of the world at this point in time. Prussia is also becoming the big dog in Central Europe. We get into Russia, okay? Russia, expansion 1533 to 1894. It kind of shows you the little chart here and what they will start to gain territory of. So the rise of Russia. Because of cultural and religious differences, Russia remained isolated from Western Europe. They had a culture from Eastern Orthodox Church and the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire was also part of the fall of Rome, sorry, the Roman Empire, which that's back to your, gosh, 8th grade history class, I think. So they did not have crusades, plague, Renaissance, Reformation, etc. They did not feature any of that in their culture or development as a country. We have Ivan IV, 1533 to 1584. He was the most powerful early czar. He was known as Ivan the Terrible. So they don't have what are known as kings or queens. In Russia, they have czars, which are kind of like kings and queens. So Ivan the Terrible helped to increase trade and contacts with the West. He seized land from Russian nobles, the boyars, to prevent them from becoming too powerful and threatening his throne. Russian rulers all tried to gain access to the sea to increase trade and military security. So it was very important to have a prominent navy. So there were three major events under this Russian period here, under Ivan. The nobles feuded over the throne, the peasants began to revolt, and foreign invaders came to Russia in an attempt to take over. You have Peter the Great. He is the most famous Tsar of Russia. So he also was in charge of westernizing Russia, which means that he kind of introduced them to these new developments of technology, culture, etc. He was 7 feet tall, so he was huge. He wanted to make Russia more Western. He created the new capital closer to Western Europe, which is known as St. Petersburg. He sent Russians to study math, shipbuilding, etc. in Western Europe because he knew that was the way that Russia was going to advance. He also encouraged Russians to dress like Europeans and to cut their beards. During the reign of Peter the Great, Russia engaged in wars with Poland, Sweden, and the Ottoman Empire. Now, the effects of his reign, Peter the Great brought Russia, closer to Western Europe, but much of Russia's own culture was lost. So that means he westernized their culture and some of their original foundation was lost. What that causes is a rift between what were known as the traditionalists or the original founders of Russia, or those people who had been there long time, and what were known as the Westerners. So this is a dangerous division between people who accepted European ways and those who clung to traditional values. Now we get into Catherine the Great. She was very different because she believed that all people were created equal. She is the last of the great absolute powers in Russia. What's crazy is that this thought of that all people were created equal, this has no merit in Russia today because they operate under communism. So her opinion changed after there was a peasant uprising. I'm sorry, this grammar is horrible. It's supposed to be T-H-E-R-E. Her opinion changed after there was a peasant uprising, and then she no longer wanted to give power to anyone. Okay? Catherine was great because she decreased freedoms of the common person in Russia. She increased the borders of Russia. She found a warm water port for Russia, and she was the last absolute monarch. And remember, absolute means that all power is held by that one ruler. And that is it.